Welcome back to everyone to Gods and Myths of Northern Europe, Part 22. Sorry I've been gone. I've been busy working and doing other stuff. I'm getting back into it slowly. Next month, hopefully I'll be going to school, hopefully. So, without further ado, let's get into the Companions of Frey. While Frey is the main deity who represents peace and plenty, there are other male figures who seem to resemble him, and who are called by different names. First of these is represented as a human being who reigned in Denmark in the far past. He was called Frodi, and both Snorri and Saxo agree that his reign was a time of universal peace and unparalleled prosperity. Snorri states that he lived in Denmark at the time when Frey ruled in Sweden, and suggests that they both reigned at the time of the peace of the Augustines. Saxo's picture is less clear because in the early books of his Danish history, he has several kings called Frodi, and some live anything but peaceful lives. But he certainly knew stories about an early king of the name, whose reign was calm and prosperous, and who after death was carried around by his people in a wagon for some time, and then finally laid in a burial mound. He even quotes 4 lines of a poem he's said to be inscribed over his grave. Frodi, whom the Danes would have wished to live long, they bore long through their lands when he was dead. The great chief's body, with his turf heaped above it, bare earth covers under the lucid sky. This Danish Frodi has obvious resemblance to Frey. In Sweden, since Frey, too, brought peace to the land, was carried around in a wagon, and had his death concealed for some time. While he was finally buried in a mound, the Old Norse word Frodir means wise, but also has the meaning fruitful and luxurious, and so would be a fitting title for a god of fertility. Snorri, indeed, tells us that one of Frey's titles was Infrodi, the fruitful. It seems reasonable to assume then that Frodi was the Danish god of fertility, the equivalent of Frey in Sweden. Another being who had some connection with Denmark and who possessed a wagon was known to the Anglo-Saxons. They called him Ing, and his name occurs in Old English runic poem written down in a 10th century manuscript. Ing, at first among the East Danes, was seen of men. Then he went eastwards across the sea. The wagon sped after. Thus the Herdings have named the hero. It is usually agreed to that the Herdings were the same as the Hastingi, the royal dynasty of the Vandals. They may have worshipped Ing while they were in South Sweden, and carried his cult to Denmark and further east. When they migrated from Scandinavia and settled in continental lands, Ing appears to be the name of a title of a god. The Anglian kings of Rhenicia in northeastern England remembered Ingi, Ingebrand, and Inguek in their genealogies as names of the founder of their line. Frey himself bore of the titles Yngvi or Inginar, and the royal dynasty of Sweden was known as the Inglings. Some of the men who were said to have worshipped Frey in Iceland bore names to Ingjald and Ingemund. It is possible that Ing was another of the names by which the god Frey was known in Northern Europe. Another royal ancestor of the Danes was said to have brought them peace and prosperity, and to have journeyed over the sea. This was Scyld, whose story is told in the opening section of the Old English poem Beowulf. Here it is said that a ship laden with treasure came across the sea to Denmark, and brought a child who afterwards became the king of the land. When he came to the end of a long and prosperous reign, he departed over the sea as he had come, for the Danes loaded a ship with weapons and precious things, and laid their king's dead body upon it, letting the sea bear it away. The full name of this king is given as Scyld Scefing, and the name of Scyldlings throughout the poem is used of the Danes. Another version of this legend seems to have survived in England as late as the 12th century, and appears in William of Malmesbury's Gesta Regum. He gives the child's name as Scaife, and says that he came over the sea with a sheaf of corn beside him. On the whole, this late tradition is thought to be untrustworthy, but Skelf's name is found earlier. The 10th century chronicle of Ethelwald says that Skelf came with a boat full of weapons to the island of Skani and was made king of the inhabitants. Earlier still, his name occurs in the 9th century genealogy of King Egbert of Wessex, included in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, with the added comment that he was born in the Ark, presumably an optimistic attempt to reconcile native tradition with biblical lore. Thus, although the allusions vary and are widely scattered, the idea of a young child coming in a ship over the sea and becoming a king in Denmark seems to have long survived the Anglo-Saxon England. When William states that Skelf came in a boat with a sheaf of corn, this suggests folk tradition of some kind. In the 13th century Chronicle of Abingdon, it is recorded that when the monks wished to prove their right to the certain meadows beside the Thames, they set a sheaf of corn with a lighted candle beside it on a round shield and floated down the river, the course taken by the shield proving their claim. Since H.M. Chadwick's first drew attention to this passage, there has been much argument, first as to whether such a custom ever existed as described, and secondly whether it could have any significant connection with the stories of Scyld and Skelf. It is not possible here to go into all the complications involved, but it seems worth noticing the fact that a series of traditions has gone into medieval times, bringing together a divine child, a sheaf of corn, and a vessel moving by supernatural power. We have also another being among the gods of Asgard, whose symbol was the shield, and who had some connections with the Vanir, the god Ul, also known as god of the shield, and seems to have used the shield as a boat, since in the Skaldic verse a shield is called Ship of Ul. Ul at one time must have been a deity of some importance, although there is little about him in the pages of Snorri. In Norway and Sweden, his name occurs in place names in two forms, Uller and Ulen. Places called after him are in many cases near those called after Freya, Njord, and Njord's wife Skadi. So that it seems natural to assume that he was associated in some way with the Vanir. There is little trace of his worship in Denmark, but a 3rd century scabbard found in a Danish bog bears a name in the runes which means servant of Ul, and its owner may have been a worshipper of the god. Ul's name is related to the Gothic word meaning majesty or glory, and because of this it has been thought that he was an early Germanic sky god. Snorri, however, associated him with the bow and with snowshoes, and Saxo tells us that he crossed the seas on a magic bone, which suggests skates. Skates and snowshoes would be fitting for a god of winter, or a deity of the northern lakes and mountains. Ul remains a mysterious and shadowy figure, serves as a reminder of the many northern deities and cults which faded into oblivion by the time that Snorri wrote his account of the gods. A more substantial deity is the father of Frey and Freya, the god Njord. He must have been concerned with fertility, but in the literature is mainly remembered as the god of the sea and ships, and will be discussed as much in such later chapter. It must be noted that here, however, that his name is the Old Norse equivalent of Nerthus, the goddess described by Tacitus. Many attempts have been made to find an explanation of the relationship between these two deities. Possibly there was originally a male and a female pair of deities, Njord and Nerthus, and Frey took the place of the earlier god. There are traces of other divine pairs, Uller, Ulen, and Fjörgvin, of whom we know little beyond the names. An alternative theory is that Nerthus was transformed into a male, god Njord, and that Njord's wife Skadi, who like Ul is said to have been who have had snowshoes and a bow, was originally the male partner, but no completely convincing explanation as to why such a change of sex took place has been found. Snorri tells us a strange tale of the marriage of Njord and Skadi. They could not decide where to live, as Skadi dwelt in the mountains, and Njord by the sea, and each was restless and unhappy in the other's abode. An explanation for this story, which has been put forward, is that it was based on memories of a joint festival lasting for 9 days, when the winter deity linked with the hills was joined with the god of warmth from the more fertile regions of the sea. However, if this was the case, the marriage was left only unhappy memories behind. This brief survey of male figures in literature who seem to have some connection with fertility shows how misleading it is to attempt to simplify the cult of the Vanir. The position is sadly complicated because we seem to be dealing with vague memories and echoes of past beliefs and customs, which have left some mark on the literature. Whereas Frey seems to have been supreme in Sweden at the close of the heathen period, there are a series of male figures bearing different names, possibly local variations of Frey, or the ghosts of earlier fertility gods displaced by the powerful Swedish deity. Elaborate theories have been woven around these half-forgotten gods, but we lack firm proof as to the nature of their cults or their relationship with one another. There are certain basic ideas which are associated with these male deities. First, we have that of the royal ancestor, as in the case of Frey and Frodi, Skil and Scaf, the first of a line of kings coming to reign over the land and bring in fruitfulness and peace. There's also an obstinate tradition of a divine infant, who comes over the waves to save his country. Frey himself may have been associated with such a story. We have the statement in one of the Edda poems that he received his hall, Alfheim, as a tooth gift, that is, a present given to a young child. The male gods are also associated with the sea, over which they come, and by which they sometimes return when their work is done. Frey, Freyr, Scaf, and Skild, Ing, and Ul are all connected with it in some way. The gods sometimes marry the daughters of giants, like Gerd and Skadi. Finally, they are associated with death and funeral rites. The body of the dead king is either placed in a mound or committed to the ocean. It may be, maybe borne around among the people before the final resting place is chosen for. This idea of death is in connection with the male deity brings a new problem. In the Near East and Mediterranean regions, we know that the dying gods of vegetation, Osiris, Tammuz, Adonis, and the rest, play a most important part in the religion of fertility. The god's death typified the coming of winter to the world, and all lamented him. Then he emerged again from the darkness of death to give new life and bring rejoicing to the spring. In the golden bough Fraser, freed Balder, the dying god of Asgard, into this death and resurrection pattern, so he too must be mentioned here, although he will be discussed in greater detail in a later chapter. In the north there are some traces of a dismembered god whose body, like that of Osiris, was formed anew. The clearest resemblance to the myth of the Near East is apparent in the Finnish Kavala, in the story of Lemminkainen, who was cut to pieces, thrown into a river, and resurrected when his mother found the remains of his body and pieced them together. At a more popular level, there are the legends of John Barleycorn, whose passion, the beating, soaking, and crushing of all the barley grains for the making of ale, is celebrated in many folk songs. In Asgard, there is a minor figure called Bigvir, meaning barley, who appears in the Edda poem Lokisana. Loki mocks at him because he is always chattering in the ear of Frey, and he has a companion named called Bela, whose name Dumzel ingeniously interprets as bee, symbolizing the other favorite drink, mead made from honey. Among the early ancestors of some Anglo-Saxon families, there is a Bio or Biu, whom some have taken to be a figure symbolizing barley. We have no real evidence, however, that he was ever worshipped as a fertility god, or regarded as a dying deity whose body grew with the year's growth. It was cut down with the harvest. Balder, son of Odin, was remembered by Snorri for his beauty and his tragic death. Early in the Viking Age, the resemblance to Christ had been noticed. In Volospa, the ending of the poem seems to imply that Balder represents Christ, coming to reign over a new heaven and new earth. Balder in his death was mourned by all of the world of nature, in some way in the most moving of Old English Christian poems, the Dream of the Road. All creation is said to weep at the death of Christ, as he hung upon the cross. But while Balder's death is deeply lamented, there is no indication in either Snorri's or Snax's accounts that he was brought back to life or to save the world from from want. Nor are we told that the crops failed and famine overtook men when he went down to the world of the dead. Part of the essential pattern is missing, and Balder is not linked in any way obvious with the Vanir, the deities of fertility. He is associated rather with the heroes of Odin. On his subject more will be said later. It seems probable, however, that Snorri's impressive description of Balder's death and the grief it caused owe something to the memory of a god slain for men's preservation and for the fruitfulness of the earth. It may well be this which gives his account, significantly different from Saxo's, its peculiar power, so that it is one of the best known and most loved of all of the northern myths. It is hard to doubt that the story owes something to the cult of the Vanir, even if Balder himself were not a true member of that family. The male god of fertility is bound to die, and his death must be universally lamented, as was that of Balder. In lamenting it, we mourn for our own fate, for the blight that man is born for. But the death of the god is only part of the pattern. New life and renewal of promise are brought in with the spring, and fulfillment with the harvest, and therefore the mourning must be followed by rejoicing. In some religions, the rebirth of hope was linked with a belief in immortality for men, but this does not seem to have been the case in Northern Europe. We have the dead Frey in his mound, the dead Frodi in his wagon. We have the early kings of the Swedes sent down to death in strange and violent forms. We have the body of Halfdan the Black, an early king of Norway, divided among his people, so that 4 different districts were each said to hold one portion of his dismembered body. No idea of a resurrection, however, has come down to us in the form of which we find in the Osiris legend. Although in one sense, Frey had returned to men with his priestess and his wagon every year, in North similarly to the Danes in earlier times, both welcomed with universal rejoicing, there is no clear indication that this was return from the land of the dead. In the same way, the idea of a triumphal return is wholly lacking in the story of Balder. Although Hel had promised that universal lamentation would bring him back, instead we find that the favorite pattern is that of the new viral successor replacing the older god, or a divine child ruling men for a season, and then departing to leave the work to a successor. In the memories of the old northern religion of fertility, which are memories are discernible in the literature, the emphasis appears to be on a series of divine rulers and upon a kind of rebirth rather than resurrection from the dead. It is possible here that we are misled because we are dealing with fragments and with a confused mass of evidence from different periods, but on the whole this emphasis appears to be a consistent one. It is a function of the male god of fertility to die for the land and for his people, while the goddess never dies. Her function is to weep over him, perhaps to help bring about his return, or to give birth to the divine child who is to take his place. The world first weeps with her and then rejoices at the renewed promise. This helps to make clear the part played by Frigg, when she calls upon all things to weep for Balder, and again by the new sons of the gods, to avenge their fathers and rule over a new Asgard when first is destroyed. But the story of Balder does not fit wholly into the pattern. It may be noted that Frey leaves no son to avenge him. His descendants, like those of Frodi and Skuld, are the later kings of the land who follow him one by one to the land of the dead, some possibly by way of sacrificial death. It remains to attempt to discover what was the part played by the goddess of the north in the pattern of fertility. Whew. Okay, that was that. The next part will be the mother goddess, but I will cover that in another video. And one more thing before you guys click off, I am doing a Q&A for my channel. As some of you might know, I am non-binary. I've been identifying as that for like 7 years now, and I wanted maybe to make a video about it, and I can answer any questions you guys have, so ask those in the comments. And I will see you in the other videos. Goodbye, everyone.